Hi, welcome back to the channel. Thanks very much for joining me. So, I don't think there's any great surprise about what this week's video is going to be about, because it really is part 2 of last week's video. What I'm talking about today is the Bill Evans Trio Sunday at the Village Vanguard. And as where last week I compared the new UHQR with my current reference for that, which was the Tape Project Tape. Today, what I'm doing is comparing the new UHQR with what was, spoiler alert, my current reference, the Mofi One-Step. Now, I'll start talking about this One-Step first, because it is unique and interesting. I did many videos on Mobile Fidelity One-Steps, basically under the false impression that they were AAA, all-analogue, through the entire sort of recording and production chain, only to find out that there was a DSD step in them, that the master tapes were recorded to DSD, and then those DSDs were kind of transported back to Mofi and then were cut on an all-analogue lathe, and one-step vinyl records produced. And I will go through this just a little, what this process is. So the first thing to point out is this was actually one of the first Mofi One-Steps, and they all had this sort of information in them, an explanation of what's going on. And for this particular record, this is true. This is 100% factual. So whereas on a normal recording you'll have a lacquer cut, plated and molded to make a father, which is a mold which you can reuse. That will be used to create a mother, which is a mold which you can reuse. That is reused to create the stampers, which is a mold, and you typically, press, several thousand records from one stamper. So that's the normal way a record is made. And of course you can make, you can only make one father from a lacquer, but you can make several mothers from a father, several stampers from each mother, and thousands of vinyl LPs from each stamper. So the Mofi One-Step process, and Impex also have dabbled in this, it's worth noting. But the lacquer obviously is plated and cast to create something they call a convert, which you can think of as either the father or the stamper, but then that is used to make the record. So we've cut out 2 steps of moulding, which intuitively is a good thing. I don't think there's any question about that. But if you want to produce above a certain number of records, it means you've got to cut a new lacquer, which can involve some variation. It's got to be plated, variation, etc., etc. So in theory this is a better approach. This is the common approach. Okay, now I'm just going to whip through the what you get in this box here, because I haven't done this for quite some time. So here we are. We've got inside the box, we've got 2 individual covers for LP1 and LP, well, I just noticed they're the wrong way around, LP1 and LP2. You've got a printed sort of original cover copy. I must admit, the printing quality, the scanning quality of all that, the printing quality of this reproduction of the back cover is pretty lo-fi, I would say. And a couple of very, very nice high-res photos. Okay, very, very nice photos. Can't argue with those. So let's pop all this back, and I'll show you one of the LPs. So you get these nice, can't argue with them, very nice covers. In there is kind of a stiffener, which has cutaways here, which correspond with the internal flaps on the cover, so that the LP sees a completely flat environment, which should help with reducing sort of scuffing and warping. Very nice archival quality anti-static inner sleeves, non-scratching, and in fact exactly the same as what Mofi, Analogue Productions use for their UHQRs and Atlantic 75th and for everything, I think. So, you know, there's no difference there. And then here you've got, you know, disc 1 of the LPs. You'll notice my mucky fingerprints over this label. That's one thing I don't like about these labels, is they pick up fingerprints like nothing on earth. And what you may or may not be able to see, I don't know here, you may see this is translucent. I don't know if you can see me through that or not till I watch the footage back, but there we go. This is what they call super vinyl. And I do want to have a little word on super vinyl, because this is Mofi's favourite vinyl formulation, and it's certainly low noise and sounds very, very good. But I have found far more instances of warped records with Mofi's super vinyl than with Mofi's regular vinyl, or indeed any other vinyl formulation. Now, I do actually have a record flattening machine, so you'd think, well, that's annoying for most people, but surely it doesn't bother you particularly. Well, yes, it does, because it doesn't flatten well, and I think it actually degrades when you put it in the flattening machine. So it's not a solution. So super vinyl for me is not preferable. I would rather they chose their regular vinyl, to be perfectly honest. But anyway, that's what you get in the Mofi Ultradisc One-Step pressing. And as I say, I've got, how many have I got? I've actually sold a few off, but I've got well over a dozen of these One-Steps. I have sold a few off because other things have come along subsequently which I've preferred, and, you know, I only need my favourite reference of any record. I don't need half a dozen different copies. Excuse me. But anyway, there's my Mofi One-Step. Incidentally, they made 3,000 copies of these, so they are blooming collectible. And it is the only one that is fully analog. Now, brand new release. Again, a limited edition. This is an edition of 5,000. I've left the shrink on here because you can see the sort of the stickers on here, but this is again 100% all analog, cut from the original masters, as the other is. This one's cut by Kevin Gray. The Mofi's cut in-house, and I think we'll get on in the listening to the Mofi in-house sound. Okay, but you can see if I pull back the cover, it's a nice sort of leather effect, sort of high quality art card box. This fillet here is solid wood with a leather effect vinyl over it. And again, just because I've done this already last week with the Waltz with Debby, but I'll show you what you get. And it's very similar. Same, two Clarity vinyl records. You can see they come in the same inner sleeves essentially. Now, Clarity vinyl, I haven't had anywhere near the number of warped discs that I have with the Mofi, but I think I might have had one or two out of the, again, I don't know, 15 or so UHQRs I've got that have been very slightly warped, but they flattened absolutely fine with no degradation, no side effects whatsoever, so that's all good. We've got a technical spec sheet. We've got the same flyer that I mentioned last week, and I probably will do the Pablo series next. I may even slip in a, 2 videos into 1 week, because I'm sort of getting slightly behind and swamped by phenomenal new records coming in. The same booklet that I mentioned last week, because of course this is literally the companion piece to Waltz for Debby. And then here's the repro of the original cover, and finally the limited edition certificate. But yeah, here's the repro of the original cover, and you can see here it's really nicely textured. I don't have an original copy of this album, but I mean, I won't bother getting the Mofi out again. But you know, the quality of the printing here is in another league. It really is. Frankly, the Mofi, the photos are beautiful. Everything else is just simply not in this league. And interestingly enough, we've got a couple of those photos reproduced here. So a beautiful cover. I mean, it really is. It's solid. It's stiff. It has got this authentic texture to it, and I mean, yeah, just side by side here. Look at these two. I know I've got the shrink on the Analogue Productions UHQR, but you know, they've really kind of fudged this one up very amateurishly in Photoshop, pushing up the black point, and it looks horrible in comparison. Okay, so what I'm going to do first is talk about the Mofi first, because that's the one I played first, as simply as that. Now, this is obviously following on from last week's review, where I covered the tape project and the UHQRs of Waltz for Debby. So, and really, this is a companion piece. It could be sides 3 and 4 of a double album. I mean, it literally could. So I'm just jumping straight in and establishing, first of all, how the soundstage is. Now, bass is still hard left, piano is still hard right, the drums are still behind and very slightly inside the bass. That's the very first thing I would note. And overall, right from the word off, it's a very nice, chilled, warm, easy listen. There is no question. Okay? Now, the bass is very deep and very full, and it actually has subtly attempted to move that soundstage around. And what's happened is, and I think this is typical with Mofi and nearly all Mofis, and some of the time it's a benefit and some of the time it isn't. It's just how it is. But I think that the Mofi have kind of a house sound, and that's in the mastering. And typically the bass is kind of fuller. It's brought forward slightly. It's kind of fudged up. It's fudged up isn't really the word, but there's a little bit of EQ there to lift the bass, I think. And, you know, on this particular record, that gives you the impression of the bass being very deep and full. And in the soundstage, it almost pushes Scott LaFaro in front of Bill Evans. Now, I don't think that's natural. I had a comment on my last video from someone who has the Tape Project tape. I forgive you for, can't remember your name off the top of my head. But he was saying that he felt with the Tape Project tape, he's always felt with it, and he doesn't have the vinyl, that the left channel was slightly quieter than the right channel. And so therefore he kind of compensates by adjusting the sort of the repro levels on the tape. Now, I can kind of see where he's coming from, because if you want the piano and the bass at the same level, that is what your inclination would tend towards doing. And I think that's what they've done here. So they've not only EQ'd the bass up, which I think is a common Mofi trait, but they've actually slightly increased the level possible. This is a possible of the left channel to sort of more evenly match in level the piano and the bass. But actually, when you do that, you can't recreate a soundstage just by making something louder, because it's about, you know, almost inaudible things like the echo of that bass off of the rear walls and the ceiling and the floor and the side walls and the similarly the echo of the piano off those surfaces. They're almost to the degree of things you can't hear, and how the sound of the bleed in the drum mic of the piano is, and how the bleed in the piano mic the drum is, or the bass is, all these kind of things. So to try and sort of undo the reality of the situation in the mix, on the finest recordings and the finest systems, it doesn't kind of sit together naturally. And I kind of think that's a little bit what's going on here. So, like I said, getting back to the sound, the bass is very deep and very full, and it sort of almost pushes Scott LaFaro in front of Bill Evans. At that same time, the piano is very, very, very slightly kind of sounds a bit like that, just a little bit kind of coloured, a little bit veiled, a little bit soft. And I think that's because they've pushed, it's just relative, but they've pulled the bass up. But what's interesting is the drums, which are mostly on the bass side, sound very kind of one-notey on this. All you're really aware of is the sort of cymbals, and sounds all very sort of samey, soft and muted. And this is like just a very overall view, and it's not something that's bad, because like I said right at the start, if you listen to this in isolation, what did I write here? It's really nice, really chilled, a really easy listen. And that is kind of, that's what this music is about. So this is a really nice, really chilled, really easy listen, okay? Now, I'm just going to put this one aside and grab the UHQR. So then we go on to the UHQR. Immediately, track one, there's more colour on the piano, much more colour. And the bass is not as forward. And it's not as bassy, nowhere near as bassy. And there's one other thing which is really fundamental. There's much better kind of shuffle of the drums, if you like. The bass has got better pitch definition. Again, it's nowhere near as loud. It is slightly behind, well, slightly back off. It's not behind, it's hard left, whereas the piano's hard right. But it's slightly further back. Bill Evans is forward of Scott LaFaro in the soundstage, I would suggest. But the bass has got more pitch definition, and what you get, rather than this big bassy kind of thing, and it's most apparent when the sort of the jazz, and this is never free jazz, this is always very easily accessible, but when it gets slightly more free, okay, on here you can hear that real interplay between them and what they're doing. On the Mofi, it just gets a bit confusing. And this is to my head, who doesn't get free jazz. You have to bear that in mind, okay? And really on the Mofi, the drums almost play no relevance, whereas here they're absolutely in there quite equally, and it's the subtlety. And the UHQR conveys the tempo of the trio much more to my liking. And I think, I mentioned that the bass is much louder on the Mofi and more equal in volume to a piano. You get a piano, I don't know, let's say 10 feet away from you, and a double bass, let's say 10 feet away from you, in a room. They're both, including the drums, all three of them, they're acoustic instruments. And sure, they've been mic'd up for this recording, but you have a piano and you have a bass. The piano sounds louder. It just does, much more. Yeah, in my opinion anyway. I just don't think that an acoustic bass, an upright bass, can project the same intensity of volume and impact as a piano can. It just isn't. So I think the fact that the piano is louder than the bass on this one is actually critically naturally balanced. And I think on the Mofi it's less naturally balanced. Okay, it's more of mixing desk jiggery pokery. It's not as natural. And by pushing the sound forward and backwards, pulling around with it on the Mofi, what you do in addition to losing that kind of utterly natural feeling is you remove color and light and balance, because it just doesn't work like that. You know, if you've got something massive and something small and there's a space around it and an air and a light, if you pump this one up, you know, the density of that air around it becomes bigger too. And you've got a mismatch between the sort of density of air, so to speak, or the density of the space. And it loses that, just that intuitive, beautiful thing. The natural, wonderful, easy listening. As I said, the Mofi is an easy listen, but it's a different easy listen, okay? I'm just going to just very quickly run through sort of a further impression. And this was, because as I said, I mean, certainly side one, I played the Mofi first. Then just out of interest and for balance, side two, I played the UHQR first. And, you know, my overall feelings is the piano is colourful, the bass is light, tuneful and soulful, and the drums are really grooving and shuffling, you know, full of light. And then going to the Mofi, the piano is pulled in a little because it's, you know, they pulled it back. It's not quite as wide in the soundstage and it's not quite as forward in the soundstage. And the bass, which is of course pushed a bit forward, is not particularly light. It doesn't feel as nimble, light on its feet, or soulful, or as tuneful. And the drums, as I said again, they've sort of been sort of altered by this space squashing kind of thing, and just temporarily in the time domain, everything just feels just a touch disjointed. And yeah, I think, you know, that really does sum it up. For me, the UHQR, there's a real band playing together, making sense in a real space, with a real kind of interaction between them. And it just sounds natural, open and free. And the Mofi, you know, don't get me wrong, it sounds wonderful, but up against this, it sounds slightly disjointed, not as, you know, definitely not as natural, a little bit forced and a little bit sucked out at the same time. And yeah, I think that's really all I have to say on this. So, you know, if you haven't seen it already, please do go and check out my my review on the UHQR Waltz for Debby up there. I will say there was a couple of comments about that review where people were sort of complaining that I was comparing it to a tape and thinking it's very unfair. And well, I mean, unfair, fair. What I'm doing is you know, this is you know, what we're in here, what we're into surely is, you know, high fidelity is about trying to recreate the live event, recreate the reality. That's what we buy better quality records over worse quality records for. That's why we invest money in our hi-fi systems. If there is a situation where the tape is available, and I did this with the White Stripes video, I think I did it with the John Coltrane Love Supreme video, I did it with the Hemiolia, you know, the Miles Davis Kind of Blue, and I've got dozens and dozens and dozens of tapes, but only dozens. I've got thousands of LPs. So when, you know, in the occasion where I do have a tape to reference, of course I'm going to reference it, you know. And for those of you who aren't interested in tape, aren't interested in investing or searching out tape, fine. What I'm trying to do is in those instances is show you how close or not the vinyl LP gets to the tape, and the tape is the ultimate source. That's all there is to it. Okay, so I hope that explains something, and I will, you know, I will look forward to seeing you all again soon for the next video, which, as I say, I suspect will be the Pablo, but there are several other things vying for my attention. So if you've enjoyed this video, please do leave a like. Also, do subscribe. That helps as well. Helps boost the channel, which helps me out immensely. And I look forward to seeing you all again soon. Thanks a lot. Bye now. Bye.